Life on the island of Tahatma never truly stopped spinning. The sea whispered ancient secrets to the white sand. The coconut palms swayed like dancers in the warm breeze. And the sun rose each morning as if painting the world anew in strokes of gold and rose. For the people who called this small paradise home, time moved differently, slower, sweeter. Measured not by clocks, but by the tides and the laughter of children playing near the shore. Samanta Rice was 24, the youngest of three sisters, and the only one who still believed that love could stay. Her two older sisters had already lost their hearts to men who arrived on tourist boats and left with the next tide. Love here is borrowed, they used to warn her. It never belongs to us, but Samanta refused to listen. She had fire in her blood and dreams too big for the island. Every morning she walked the pristine beach barefoot, sketchpad tucked under her arm, capturing the way light danced on the waves. Her long dark hair flowed freely in the wind, and her simple white dress clung to her sun-kissed skin like a second breath. She was beautiful in the way only island girls could be, wild and guarded, and full of quiet strength. Then he arrived. Rick Alvarez stepped off the small ferry one humid afternoon, carrying nothing but a worn leather bag and the quiet confidence of a man who owned half the future. At 32, he was already a respected college professor and the founder of one of Makati's largest computer schools. He had come to Tahatma for a 1-month sabbatical, to rest, to paint, and perhaps to remember that he was still human beneath the suits and spreadsheets. He rented the little yellow cottage beside Samanta's family sari-sari store. The first time he saw her, she was serving fresh coconut water to tourists, laughing at something her younger brother said. Their eyes met across the wooden counter, and for a moment the entire island seemed to hold its breath. Every morning after that, Rick came for coffee. Every evening, he found excuses to walk the beach where she sketched. One stormy night, the sky cracked open with thunder and rain poured like the heavens were weeping. Rick ran to the sari-sari store for shelter and found Samanta alone, painting by the soft glow of a kerosene lamp. She was working on a self-portrait, bare shoulders glowing in the warm light, her expression defiant and free. The curve of her spine, the soft shadow along her collarbone. It was raw, honest, and breathtaking. "You're braver than any of my students in Manila," Rick said, his voice low and sincere, water dripping from his hair. Samanta turned, a small smile playing on her lips. "Bravery is cheap here on Tahatma," she replied softly. "Love, that's the expensive one." The rain grew heavier. Thunder rolled like distant drums. Rick stepped closer, drawn by something he couldn't name. When their eyes locked again, the storm outside felt small compared to the one building between them. He reached out and gently brushed a strand of wet hair from her cheek. And then they kissed. It was slow at first, tentative, tasting of salt and rain and possibility. But soon it deepened, passionate and urgent, as if both of them knew this moment was stolen from time itself. Lightning flashed, illuminating their entwined silhouettes against the wooden walls. The kerosene lamp flickered wildly, casting dancing shadows around them. For the next 3 weeks, they lived inside a perfect secret bubble. They swam naked in hidden coves under moonlight. They danced barefoot on wet sand while fireflies lit the air like tiny stars. Rick taught her how to use his laptop, his fingers brushing hers as he showed her simple coding. Samanta taught him how to truly see, how to capture the soul of the island with nothing but watercolor and heart. He called her his muse. She called him her impossible dream on the morning he was scheduled to leave for Manila. They stood on the old wooden pier as the sun painted the sea in liquid gold. Samanta's heart felt heavy, but she tried to smile. Rick kept her face with both hands, his eyes filled with love and conflict. "I swear to you, Samanta," he whispered, voice thick with emotion, "I will come back for you, or I'll send for you. This isn't the end. You've changed me. You're my muse, my everything." She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes, and pulled him into one last deep, desperate kiss. As the small ferry horn sounded in the distance, Rick boarded reluctantly, never taking his eyes off her until the boat disappeared beyond the horizon. Samanta stood alone on the pier. the wind tugging at her dress. Watching the empty sea, she whispered to the waves, "Come back to me, Rick." But the island kept spinning, and deep down, something told her that promises made on Tahatma didn't always survive the concrete jungle of Manila. Manila swallowed her whole. 6 weeks after Rick left Tahatma, Samanta stepped off the overcrowded ferry in Batangas with nothing but one worn suitcase, a heart full of hope, and the echo of his last promise ringing in her ears. "I'll send for you," he had said. I swear, she believed him. The moment she arrived in the city, the difference hit her like a slap. The air was thick with exhaust fumes and the constant roar of traffic. Skyscrapers pierced the sky like cold steel fingers, and the streets pulsed with millions of people who never seemed to slow down. No gentle waves, no whispering palms, only horns, neon lights, and the crushing weight of a city that cared nothing. For island dreams, Samanta found temporary shelter on her cousin's old couch in a cramped apartment inn. Tondo, the space smelled of frying garlic and damp concrete. At night she lay awake, staring at the flickering bulb on the ceiling, clutching her phone and waiting for Rick's call. It never came. His number went straight to voicemail, messages went unread. When she finally reached his Makati condo, the security guard looked at her with pity and said, "Sir Alvarez does not know any Samanta from the province." The words cut deeper than any knife. Desperate and running out of money, Samanta took whatever work she could find. By day, she waited tables in a noisy restaurant in Malate, balancing heavy trays while customers barked orders and pinched her waist when she passed. Her feet ached. Her smile grew brittle. By night, she became something she never imagined. In the dim back rooms of small art studios in Ermita and Quezon City, she learned to survive as a figure model. At first, she refused to undress completely. But when the rent was due, her cousin announced she was pregnant and needed the couch back. And hunger gnawed at her stomach. Pride became a luxury she could no longer afford. She became Ray's Muse No. 7. The artists wanted her exactly as Rick had once seen her, raw and guarded, naked. They praised the golden tone of her island skin, the graceful curve of her back, the quiet fire in her eyes even when she was breaking inside. Her body appeared in painting after painting. Island light, forgotten tide, broken promise. The canvases sold quickly to collectors who never knew the girl behind the brushstrokes was slowly disappearing. One evening, while walking home through the crowded sidewalks, Samanta froze. There, on a massive digital billboard above EDSA, was Rick's face, confident, polished, smiling. The text beneath it read, "Alvarez Tech Institute, future starts here. Professor Rick Alvarez." Founder and CEO knees nearly buckled. Later that week, she saw him in person. She had gone to the university campus hoping to catch a glimpse of him. Instead, she saw Rick walking across the quad with a tall, elegant woman in designer heels and pearls. Clarissa, the woman laughed at something he said and casually touched his arm the way only a fiancé touches a man who belongs to her. Samanta stood hidden behind a pillar, tears burning her eyes. The man who had danced with her barefoot under the stars, who had called her his muse, now looked perfectly at home in this world of power and privilege. He had forgotten her. Or worse, he had chosen to forget. That night, alone in the tiny room she now rented for twice what it was worth, Samanta stared at the handful of crumpled bills in her hand. She had sold pieces of herself in front of strangers just to eat. She picked up her sketchpad and began to draw Rick's face again, the way she remembered him on the beach. Then, with a sudden cry of rage and pain, she slashed the paper with a palette knife over and over, until the drawing was nothing but torn shreds. Manila had taken everything. The girl who once danced freely on Tahatma's shores was now just another lost soul in the concrete jungle, invisible, heartbroken, and slowly turning into one of the many ghosts that haunted its glittering streets. Yet somewhere deep inside, a small flame still burned, a flame that whispered, "He bought my coffee every morning. He kissed me in the rain. He promised." And that tiny flame refused to die, even as the city tried to crush it 6 months after she arrived in Manila. The storm finally broke. It happened on a humid Friday night at the prestigious Luminar Gallery in Makati, one of the most exclusive art venues in the city. The event was titled Expose, New Works by 10 Emerging Artists. The gallery was packed with Manila's elite, socialites dripping in diamonds, collectors with deep pockets, and critics sipping expensive champagne. Samanta was there not as a guest, but as hired help, a waitress in a simple black uniform, moving silently between the glittering crowd with a tray of drinks. Her feet throbbed from another long day, but she needed the extra pay. Then she saw them. On the pristine white walls hung 23 large canvases, every single one of her body, captured in oil and acrylic, bathed in dramatic lighting. Island light showed her standing in moonlight, bare skin glowing. Forgotten Tide captured her looking over her shoulder with sad, longing eyes. Broken Promise portrayed her curled on the floor, vulnerable and exposed. Each painting was raw, sensual, and unmistakably her. The room spun. Samanta's tray trembled violently. A glass of red wine slipped from her fingers and shattered on the marble floor like blood exploding across stone. The sharp sound cut through the elegant chatter. Heads turned. A well-dressed gallery host announced with excitement, "Ladies and gentlemen, I am thrilled to share that all 23 pieces have just been sold to a single anonymous beer who paid triple the asking price." Whispers rippled through the crowd like wildfire. Samanta's eyes scanned the room desperately, and then she saw him. Rick Alvarez stood near the entrance, signing the final receipt, his jaw tight, his face pale. He looked tormented, as if every stroke of paint on those canvases had cut him personally. Their eyes locked across the crowded gallery. "Rick," she whispered, her voice breaking, then louder, raw, furious, and full of 6 months of buried pain. "Rick." The entire room fell silent. Samanta stormed toward him, the shattered glass crunching under her cheap shoes. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't care who saw. "You bought them," she cried, her voice cracking with rage and heartbreak. "You bought every naked inch of me. After you abandoned me. After you left me to starve in this godforsaken city while you played house with your rich fiancé." Gasps echoed through the gallery. Phones came out. Cameras flashed. Rick turned fully toward her, his face a mask of shock, guilt, and something deeper, longing. He looked like a man who had just been struck by lightning. "Samanta, please let me explain." Before he could finish, a tall, elegant woman in a designer black gown stepped beside him. Clarissa. Her diamond engagement ring sparkled coldly under the gallery lights. Clarissa's voice was ice. "Who is this island girl, Rick?" "Another one of your little projects." Samanta laughed bitterly through her tears, the sound sharp and broken. "I gave you everything," she screamed, her voice rising above the murmurs. "I left my home, my family, my dignity for you. I sold my body in front of strangers just to survive while you built your empire and forgot I ever existed." The crowd erupted. Whispers turned into loud chatter. Security guards started moving forward. Rick stepped toward her, eyes desperate, voice cracking with emotion. "Samanta, it wasn't like that. I never forgot you." Not for one single day, but Clarissa grabbed his arm tightly, her face flushed with humiliation. "This is absolutely humiliating." "We're leaving now." Rick yanked his arm free, his gaze never leaving Samanta's tear-stained face. "No," he said, his voice low but firm. "Not this time." Chaos exploded. People were recording. Social media was already lighting up. Hashtags began trending within minutes. Hashtag nude muse Manila, hashtag gallery scandal, hashtag professor and the model. Samanta stood in the center of the storm she had unleashed, chest heaving, tears flowing freely. For the first time in months, she felt alive. And completely shattered, she had come to Manila chasing a promise. Instead, she had found betrayal wrapped in expensive frames, and now the entire city was watching her heart break in public. As security finally reached her and began to escort her out, Samanta looked back at Rick one last time. In his eyes, she saw not just guilt, but the same man who had kissed her in the rain on Tahatma. The storm had broken, and neither of them would ever be the same again. The scandal spread like wildfire through Manila's glittering social circles. By morning, hashtag Nude Muse Manila was trending nationwide. Grainy videos of Samanta's outburst at the Luminar Gallery flooded social media. Clips of her tear-streaked face screaming at Rick while surrounded by paintings of her own naked body were viewed millions of times. Comments poured in, some sympathetic, many cruel. Island girl trying to trap a rich professor, gold digger exposed. Poor Clarissa, humiliated in public. Clarissa's powerful family wasted no time. By noon, a carefully worded statement was released to the press. Professor Rick Alvarez's brief involvement with a provincial woman was a regrettable mistake. We condemn any attempt to use private relationships for personal gain or public scandal. Samanta lost everything in less than 24 hours. The restaurant fired her immediately. We can't have this kind of drama. The art studios that once hired her as a model suddenly had no openings. Her landlord posted an eviction notice on her door after receiving anonymous threats. Death threats began arriving through private messages and even slipped under her door. Go back to your island. Whore, you ruined a good man's life. Terrified and broken, Samanta hid in a cheap, rundown motel in Pasay, the kind of place where the walls were thin. The sheets smelled of cigarette smoke, and the neon sign outside buzzed loudly all night. She paid in cash for 3 nights with the last of her savings. Inside the dim room, she sat on the cold tiled floor surrounded by the few possessions she still had. The slashed canvases she had managed to take from the gallery lay scattered around her like fallen soldiers. Some were torn, others defaced with angry red paint. In every ripped portrait, her own eyes stared back at her, accusing. Vulnerable, naked, Samanta hugged her, knees tightly to her chest, and sobbed until her throat burned. She cried for the girl who once danced barefoot on Tahatma's beach. She cried for the foolish hope that had carried her across the sea. She cried for the man who had promised her the world and then left her to rot in it. Hours passed. The sky outside turned from gray to black. A heavy knock echoed on the thin motel door. Samanta froze. She didn't answer. The knocking grew louder, more urgent. Samanta, it's me. Open the door. Rick's voice, raw, exhausted, desperate. She stayed silent, tears still streaming down her face. I'm not leaving until you let me explain, he called again, his voice cracking. Please, I know I don't deserve it, but just hear me out. 20 minutes passed. The knocking never stopped. Finally, with shaking hands, Samanta stood up and opened the door just a crack. Rick stood there looking like a ghost of the man she once knew. His usually neat hair was disheveled. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his expensive shirt was wrinkled and damp from the rain. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. When he saw her tear-stained face and the chaos of slashed paintings behind her, something in his expression shattered. Samanta, he whispered, voice thick with regret. She stepped back, letting him enter, but kept her distance, arms wrapped protectively around herself. You have 2 minutes, she said coldly, though her voice trembled. Then I want you gone. Rick closed the door behind him and stood in the middle of the wreckage, eyes scanning the torn canvases that bore her likeness. I never meant for any of this to happen, he began, his voice low and broken. After I left Tahatma, Clarissa's family tightened their grip. Her father had funded most of my school. They threatened to pull everything, scholarships for thousands of students, the entire institute, if I didn't go through with the engagement. I tried to reach you so many times, but every call was monitored, every message deleted before it could be sent. I thought if I stayed silent, I could fix it quietly and come back to you clean. Samanta let out a bitter, hollow laugh. So you let me sell my body to strangers because protecting your precious empire was more important than me? Rick flinched as if she had slapped him. I bought every single painting, he said quietly, because I couldn't stand the thought of anyone else owning even a piece of you. I thought, if I kept them all, I could somehow keep you safe. Keep us safe. Samanta's eyes filled with fresh tears. You bought my shame, she whispered. You turned the most vulnerable parts of me into something you could own and hide. The room fell. silent except for the distant sound of traffic and the buzzing. Neon sign outside. Rick took one careful step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. I lost everything today, he said softly. I transferred ownership of the school to a foundation this morning. Clarissa ended the engagement the moment the scandal broke. Her family cut all ties. I'm no longer the successful professor you saw on those billboards. I'm just a man who made the worst mistake of his life. He looked around at the slashed paintings again, then back at her. But I would do it all over again if it meant I could stand here and tell you the truth. Samanta stared at him, her chest heaving with pain, anger, and the dangerous spark of lingering love. The wreckage was everywhere around them, between them, inside them. And yet, in the dim light of that rundown motel room, something fragile and broken was still refusing to die completely. The air in the rundown Passy motel room felt thick enough to choke on. Samanta stood frozen, arms wrapped tightly around herself as if trying to hold her broken pieces together. Rick's words still hung between them like smoke after a fire. I lost everything today. I'm no longer the successful professor. I'm just a man who made the worst mistake of his life. She wanted to scream at him. She wanted to throw every slashed painting at his face. Instead, she laughed a sharp, ugly sound that echoed off the peeling walls. You lost everything. She repeated bitterly. You lost money. You lost your reputation. You lost your rich fiancé, but me? I lost myself, Rick, piece by piece. Every time I stood naked in front of those artists, I told myself it was temporary, that you would come, that you still loved me. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. She walked over to one of the torn canvases on the floor and picked it up. It was one of her favorites, the painting where she had been looking over her shoulder with soft eyes. The same way she used to look at him on the beach in Tahatma. Look at this, she whispered, her voice trembling. This is what I became because of you. With a sudden burst of rage, she ripped the canvas further. The sound loud and violent in the small room. Rick flinched but didn't stop her. He simply watched, eyes filled with unbearable guilt. I painted you every night, Samanta continued, her voice rising. I drew your face over and over just so I could stab it with a knife. Because even after everything, I still saw you when I closed my eyes. I hated you, and I still loved you. That's what you did to me. She dropped the ruined canvas and turned to face him fully, chest heaving. Why did you buy them, Rick? Tell me the truth. Was it guilt? Possession? Or were you just trying to erase the evidence of what you threw away? Rick took a slow step closer. His hands were shaking. I bought them because I couldn't breathe knowing strangers were looking at you the way only I should, he said, his voice raw. Every painting reminded me of the night in the cottage. The rain, the way you smiled at me when I called you my muse. I thought if I owned them all, I could keep that version of you safe. But I was wrong. I was a coward. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. With trembling fingers, he opened a document and held it out to her. Look, Samanta hesitated, then took the phone. It was the official transfer of ownership of Alvarez Tech Institute to a nonprofit foundation, dated this morning. He had given away his entire life's work. I chose you, Rick whispered. Even if you never forgive me, I chose you today. The silence that followed was deafening. Samanta stared at the screen for a long time. Then she looked up at him, really looked. She saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the deep lines of regret on his face, the way his shoulders slumped as if carrying the weight of the entire city. The anger inside her cracked open like a ripe mango sweet. Messy and impossible to contain, she sank down onto the edge of the bed, the fight slowly draining from her body. I remember the boy who cried when a baby sea turtle got swept back into the ocean, she said softly, almost to herself. I remember how gently you traced my collarbone with a paintbrush and told me you wanted to remember every line of me forever. Rick knelt in front of her, careful not to touch her yet. I still want that, he said, voice thick with emotion. I want to remember you every day for the rest of my life. Not as a painting, not as a secret, as my wife, as the woman I wake up to. As the one who taught me what real love feels like, Samanta's lips trembled. Tears continued to fall, but they were softer now. I hated you so much, she whispered. But I never stopped loving you. That's the cruelest part of all this. She reached out and touched his face with trembling fingers. Tracing the familiar jawline she had drawn so many times, Rick closed his eyes at her touch. Leaning into her hand like a man dying of thirst finally given water. Then let me paint you again, he said quietly. Not naked, not hidden, but smiling, happy, clothed in the sunlight of Tahatma. Let me spend the rest of my life making this right. Samanta looked around the room, at the wreckage of canvases, at the man kneeling before her, at the fragile hope flickering between them. The canvas of truth had finally been revealed. It was messy. It was painful. It was covered in scars, but for the first time in months, it also felt like it could still be beautiful. She took a shaky breath and whispered the words that would change everything. Take me home, Rick. Asterisk, asterisk, 2 weeks later. The world outside the motel room had changed forever. The scandal had slowly faded from the headlines, replaced by newer gossip. Rick had quietly stepped down from public life. Clarissa's family had withdrawn completely. And Samanta had stopped running. On a quiet golden afternoon, they stood together on the Batangas Pier, waiting for the ferry that would take them back to Tahatma. The crates containing all 23 paintings were stacked neatly beside them, carefully wrapped. No longer slashed or hidden, but preserved as witnesses to their painful journey. Rick had refused to sell even one of them. Samanta wore a simple white sundress, her long dark hair dancing lightly in the sea breeze. For the first time in months, she looked peaceful. Not completely healed, but no longer shattered. Rick stood close beside her, his hand gently intertwined with hers. He looked different too, lighter, humbler, and deeply in love. The expensive suits were gone. Today he wore a plain white linen shirt and jeans. The same way he had looked when he first arrived on her island. The ferry horn sounded in the distance, announcing its approach. Samanta turned to him, her eyes soft but still carrying traces of old pain. I hated you for so long, she said quietly, her voice barely louder than the waves. Every night in that motel, I imagined hurting you the way you hurt me. But hate is just love that got lost in the storm. Rick lifted their joined hands and pressed a tender kiss to her knuckles. I know, he whispered, and I deserved every bit of that hate. I was selfish. I was weak. I chose fear over you. But Samanta, loving you was the only true thing I ever did right. She looked up at him, searching his face. Do you still see me the same way? She asked, vulnerability flickering in her eyes. After everything. After all those paintings, after the shim, after the whole world saw me naked. Do you still see your muse? Rick stepped closer, cupping her face gently with both hands, the same way he had done on that fateful morning when he left Tahatma. I see more than my muse, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I see the woman who taught me what courage really is. The woman who followed her heart across the sea even when it was breaking. The woman who survived Manila when it tried to destroy her. You are stronger, more beautiful, and more precious to me now than you ever were on that beach. A single tear slipped down Samanta's cheek. This time it wasn't from pain. She smiled, small at first, then radiant. The same smile that had once lit up the kerosene-lit cottage during the storm. Then take me home, she whispered. Back to Tahatma, where the sea still remembers us. Where we can start again. Slowly, honestly, without secrets, Rick rested his forehead against hers. Their breaths mingling in the warm afternoon air. I will spend every single day making this right, he promised, his voice steady and full of love. I'll paint you again 1,000 times if you let me. But this time, you'll be smiling, wearing flowers in your hair, dancing on the sand, fully clothed, and completely free. Samanta laughed softly, the sound like music carried by the wind. And I'll let you, she replied, her eyes sparkling. But only if you dance with me barefoot again. Only if you promise never to leave my side when the next storm comes. I promise, he said without hesitation. No more running. No more hiding. From now on, we face everything together. The fairy finally docked. Its ramp lowering with a gentle thud hand in hand. They walked toward it, two broken souls who had found their way back to each other through fire and tears. As the boat pulled away from the pier, Manila's towering skyline slowly shrank behind them, turning into nothing more than glittering dust on the horizon. Samanta leaned her head on Rick's shoulder, watching the sea sparkle under the golden sun. 23 naked versions of me, she said with a playful smile. And you still chose the real one. Rick chuckled and kissed the top of her head tenderly. The real one was always my favorite, he murmured. The one who laughs with her whole heart. The one who paints with fire in her soul. The one I want to grow old with on our little spinning island. The fairy sailed onward, carrying them home. Behind them lay betrayal, pain, and months of wreckage. Ahead of them waited Tahatma, its white shores, swaying palms and gentle waves ready to welcome its daughter back, not broken, not ashamed, but whole, healed by truth, redeemed by forgiveness. And wrapped in the sweetest kind of love, the love that survives the storm and chooses to stay.